Gentleman over here, his name is Brian Gardner. He is the General Manager and Managing Principal in Victoria at the Donington Group, which is an organisation that specialises in particular in career transitions. Brian is a strategy and change consultant, and he specialises in individual strategy and change within a corporate context. He has an extensive background as an experienced, focused and successful senior manager with a track record of substantial growth, profitability, goal achievement, people development and management of change. His specialty areas include strategy development, change management, project and program management, coaching, operational management, career strategy as well. Dealing with staff and the human resources area can sometimes be an absolute pleasure and also sometimes one of the biggest headaches in your business. Hopefully Brian can clear up a few of the matters. Please make him welcome from the Donington Group, Brian Gardner.
Thanks very much. It never sounds quite like you when they give you the bio. Is that really me? Just to start off, I really want to thank TCCI for inviting myself and also to our sister company in Tasmania, Searson Buck. We are aligned with them with the Donington Group, and there's a Donington in Tasmania, in Hobart, and Launceston as well as part of the Searson Buck Group. As mentioned, Brian Gardner, you can probably pick up on my accent that I'm born and bred in Aussie. Very similar to, I think, Alan Miltz, a few speakers ago, another South African. Really what we are as Donington is a change consultancy, and we focus both on organisational change, but more especially on individual change. And in fact, being from Melbourne, decided to come for the weekend. We arrived on Friday night and we did all the Tasmanian touristy things. So Salamanca Square, the market obviously on Saturday, Mona yesterday. I was very impressed to discover that Tasmanians get in free, so I'm sure you guys go many times. But then probably for me the highlight of our visit so far was meeting Ed Cowan. Anyone a few minutes ago, probably about half an hour ago, anyone know who Ed Cowan is? Silence was a stern reply. A couple of you, yes? Well, you should know. He's now the Australian Test opener in the cricket team, and he plays for Tasmania. And we had a really interesting discussion because he's 29. He's just joined the Australian cricket team, but he's already talking about life after cricket and really thinking about, what is it that he wants to transition to. Now, Ed's brief background, and he's not here, and I did ask him if I could briefly use him as an example. But Ed's background is he was an investment banker who used to play cricket on the weekends and then realised he wasn't passionate about investment banking, but he was passionate about cricket and decided to try and do it full time. And that's why he moved to Tasmania about 3 years ago. He's from Sydney. And now he's doing really well, obviously, at the state level, and now moving to the global stage. And he believes he probably has 3 to 4 years left on the global stage before he needs to think the next step. And it's really interesting, the challenges that Cricket Australia, the challenges that Cricket Tasmania, and the individual players, as Ed is, have challenges that all of us face. Because one of the things that Ed and I were talking about is that although he's known as an Australian cricketer, really it's all about Ed Cowan Pty Limited. And a lot of what I want to talk about today is that changing environment. The GFC has caused a number of challenges, but also opportunity when it comes to people. And that's what I'd like to cover with you briefly today. If I could just say, I know in your program it said until 2:30. Apparently that's a typo, so apparently it should be 2:50. So hopefully you'll stick with me a little bit longer. Okay, so what I want to cover briefly are these sections and comment on each of these parts of the agenda and give you a feel for what the current environment looks like. And it's applicable whether you're a small business or whether you're a large business. People are critical to your business and you really need to understand it. In fact, if I could just do a plug to the guys from the previous speakers from the Department of, Economic Development, Tourism and the Arts. They've got a great employee resource kit, which is available at the centre just around the corner. And one of the areas is retain and support. And it was interesting I quickly had a look to make sure that what I was going to say didn't contradict what they were going to say. And a number of the factors that they mention here about employee retention is really critical. And one of the problems is that the cost shows that replacing people who leave is about 1.5 times the cost of having retained them. So, guys, there's your pitch. Okay, let's get going. So let's talk a little bit about the impending talent shortage. It may not seem like that to you at the moment, but we're on the cusp of a huge shortage of talent, a huge shortage of skilled staff. 2011 was the first year that the baby boomers got to 65, which is obviously the traditional retirement age, and then not enough people to follow them. The Gen X generation is many millions of people less than the baby boomer generation. So we haven't really noticed that because of the economic climate. What's happening is that it's delaying the onset of it. On the one side, companies are quite pleased to let go of people because it's helping them at this stage. On the other side, the baby boomers want to stick around longer because the GFC has affected their superannuation. So we're seeing a little bit of a bubble at the moment where there isn't a shortage, but watch this space. Lifespans, obviously due to advances in medical understanding, easier lifestyles, etc. So you don't find traditional retirement anymore, and you're slowly noticing in business that term is starting to fall away. So people don't talk so much about retirement, they talk about transition or talk about moving to a portfolio career. So very seldom do you find someone at 60 or 65 retiring and that's it. They will tend to move to something else. And increasingly the baby boomer is seeing themselves as what I'd call Brian PTY LTD. Because the fact is that over their lifetime, they've actually gathered a number of assets and resources. Things like investment homes, like a significant share portfolio, a number of other things which provide them the interest to develop the portfolio. So what you are finding is that people don't get to 65 and retire. You do find they tend to transition and they stay in the business a little bit longer, or they want to stay in the business a little bit longer, which can cause pressure for the generations below them. Despite this, as I said, not enough new entrants to meet staffing needs, and the pressure on universities as well is they're not necessarily producing the predicted workforce needs. So what happens is we're really seeing the tip of the iceberg now, but the shrinking workforce and significant skill gaps is going to lead to a tremendous talent shortage. You're not going to be able to find the people that you need to run your businesses. Now, it doesn't seem like it at this moment in time, but that's what the trends are showing us. So one of the things you really need to consider when we're talking about this is how do we retain or how do we ensure we keep baby boomers engaged and still productive within the business? So what is it that a baby boomer wants? They're wanting that flexibility. They're wanting to step back a little bit. They don't want to work the 24/7 days that other people perhaps that they have done in the past. So being able to adapt to that and provide more of a mentorship role provides handing the baton to the next generation. So that's the impending talent shortage. Secondly, the big issue that we do find is global, diverse, and virtual workforce. The generation at the moment of the last couple of years and increasingly over the next few years, this is going to be the most diverse workforce ever. Generations, gender, ethnicity, and geography/culture. And the fact of the matter is that you've got 3 to 4 generations all in the same workforce. When I'm out consulting, I will hear the baby boomers, typically the 50-year-olds and older, complaining about the Gen Ys. They're not loyal, they don't engage, they're more interested in their mobiles, they're more interested in Facebook. All of this sort of aspect. So you've got these different ends of the spectrum. The other big change that we are seeing is the whole aspect of what's happening with women. And I'll touch on it on the next page when we're talking about a changing family structure. But in essence, the entrepreneurship is being led many times by women who are looking for a more flexible way to manage their lives rather than working 8 to 5, Monday to Friday within a corporate context. They're looking for that flexibility. Global, those of you who work with organizations or with companies that are not based in Australia, particularly if you work for a US-based company, is that me? I'm not sure. is this what we talk about always on, 24/7? Geographical culture differences. One of the things we're working with at the moment, I'm working with a large IT company, and they've just acquired, or they've been acquired by another company, and they've got a significant office in Japan, significant office in China, but the head office is in Melbourne. Why? Because that's where the CEO was. So now you find these different cultural differences, and the HR director the other day was complaining to me about their Chinese counterparts, because the CEO of the China subsidiary had employed a head of HR who had no HR experience, but she discovered that it was his sister-in-law, and immediately saw this as corruption. This is inappropriate, you shouldn't do this. Significant cultural difference. For that CEO, that was quite appropriate. And so you find these tensions across the organization, across organizations working in different parts of the world. And just as it is, from Tasmania to the mainland, those different aspects. The virtual geographic dispersion enabled by technology. Caught up for coffee with a friend this morning. He is a global expert for Oracle. He is based in Hobart in his home. But he travels all over the world, and he's part of a SWAT team. There's 4 of them in the world, and they get called out at short notice to go and fix a problem anywhere in the world. And he lives in Hobart. And he was telling us that he actually doesn't need to travel. He could do whatever's needed to fix the problem from his home, but that clients want him there. They feel like they're getting value for money if they can physically see him, as opposed to know that he's fixing it. So he couldn't do that if it wasn't enabled by technology, but you're going to see that. People being able to live in a place where the work-life balance really fits their needs. So he does have a rather unusual work-life balance in the sense that he does work at home, often because he's he's employed by Oracle. He has meetings, etc., strange times of the day or night, but it really fits where he's at. So you're going to find this increasingly enabled by technology. Changing family structures. This is an interesting one. The traditional career, the man works and earns the money, and the woman stays at home and raises the kids. That was really born in the era where men, were the primary breadwinners, and women stayed at home, as we said. And this helped shape the expectation of career dedication, because the expectation was that you were totally dedicated to your career. That's what you did. That's what the man did. He went and he worked and earned money. That was his job. That's what his life was about. You don't find that anymore. This family structure is obviously less and less common. Some of the research that I've seen, it's about 63% of families. That was the structure in the 1950s. I was surprised that it was quite low. I thought it would be higher. And in 2011, it's about 17% of families are male breadwinner, female at home. Substantial portion of families now, the main breadwinner is the woman, is the wife or the partner, the female partner. So single parent homes, dual career families, hard to juggle work and life on a regular basis, and they require significant flexibility in terms of how they manage their careers. It can't be a case of coming to work from 8 to 5, who's going to pick up the kids, what happens if one's ill, what happens if the one partner's traveling and overseas. All of these factors need to be considered by you as an employee. You cannot expect 100% focus and dedication anymore. So a couple of new expectations in the workforce. So the whole knowledge worker expertise really leads to the belief that I'm the best judge of what's right for me, not the organization. No longer do we enjoy or appreciate an organization that is paternal. I'll tell you what's good for you. I'll tell you your career path. And this whole concept of the organization being a family, that's no longer valid. And so it's really about being free agents, being Brian Pty Limited, who adjusts, versus someone who joins a company and stays there forever. And that's causing substantial tension within the workforce, because you find the senior managers are baby boomers who have been rewarded for loyalty, and this has been something that's been really positive. Whereas you find a Gen Y person, in their 20s, who for them, they've seen what's happened to their fathers or their mothers who have given so much to their work, and they don't believe that that is sustainable. And you find this tension. I'm consulting to another IT company in Melbourne, and I got a call a couple of weeks ago from the CEO. Their top technical person who's 25 years old. They built their product around this developer. Came in one day and said, I've had enough. I want to go have a break, travel around the world, have some space. And what they did was what companies often do is said, okay, well, we'll give you more money. And he said, I don't want more money. I want to travel. I've got more than enough money. I don't know how to spend it. It doesn't interest me. And so he called me in to say, can you talk to him, try and get him to stay? Long story short, we were able to negotiate a 2-month study tour, which is what we called it for tax purposes, don't tell anyone. A 2-month study tour for this guy, paid for him to travel around the world. He could choose where he wanted to go, and we had to obviously fit in certain of the technology companies. So he's going to Microsoft in Seattle, and so he goes around the world. It's going to cost the company about $20,000 for this trip, and he's coming back after 2 months, enriched, wanting to stay, thinking the company looked after him. What do you think happens to his colleagues? They look at this and say, wow, these guys are flexible. Now, we can't give everyone 2-month study tours, but you've got to understand that there's different things that are happening. What was true for the baby boomer generation is very different for the Gen Y generation. Some of the research shows that the majority of Gen Y say that they will be self-employed in 5+ years. There's a real trend to own my own business. I don't want to work for corporate. I don't want to work for someone else. I want to work for myself. Why? Flexibility is one of the key reasons. And this is pretty new for the workplace. You used to go to the workplace for camaraderie, friendship, and feeling safe. This is a place where I could spend a while. And that's now changed. Gen Y find a lot of camaraderie in the virtual world and in their connection with friends. So the other aspect, obviously, multiple rounds of layoffs. I do a lot of work at an ANZ, which, as you know, is in the news at the moment, around next round of layoffs. And since I've been working with them for about 3 years, they've had 7 published rounds of layoffs. So there's been a lot of informal rounds of layoffs, if I can put it that way, but 7 that have come to the public's awareness. I can tell you, working with staff in that business is really tough. How do you engage someone who doesn't know where it's going, what's going to be happening? So that's also made a situation where, I'm not going to wait for the company to let me go. I'm going to take control of my own future. And they're very much, company loyalty is replaced by employees who are savvy about their employability. I know how much I earn. I know how much I'm worth. I'm not concerned about some of these other trappings that my parents were concerned about. One of the big pressures on young people entering the workforce at the moment is the expectations of their parents. So in Victoria, we have a high school score called Enter, or the ATAR score. Not sure if it's the same in Tasmania. And what happens is, if you get a very high ATAR score, that qualifies you to do engineering, medical, some of those occupations. Now, what happens is that if you get a high ATAR score, you are strongly encouraged both by your school, by the society, and by your parents to do that. But didn't anyone check whether they want to do that? So I do a lot of work with young people, 25 upwards, who've tried that, realized this is not what I want to do. And we're having to rethink, what is it that you want to do? And it really comes down to what is their passion. But they really are controlling what they're doing. They're not being controlled by organizations anymore. The other aspect about Gen X and Y is that they are very much pro-family. It's very much about quality of life versus career advancement. And it's really about me, which could be quite a negative thing, because, again, as a baby boomer, we've been taught to think company, loyalty, group, team. Now you're finding the expectation is it's about me. Yes, I operate within a team, but it's about Brian Pty Ltd, which is creating a lot of tension, obviously, in the organization. Okay, so just to touch on a couple of sort of more recent career models, there's a number of these around, but these are the better known ones that are out there. The Protean, this is one that has been around for quite a long time. It's really about, I'm in control of my own career. And the company is quite happy with that, because they'll say to you, really, you've got to be responsible for yourself. You've got to take control of your career. So they're happy with that sort of thinking. The boundaryless is the self-directed, and they are their own career. So it is very much the Brian Pty Limited. So anything at any stage is this adding value? Is this good for Brian Pty Limited, as opposed to ANZ, for example? And there's a relationship we have but it's an equal relationship as opposed to a dependent relationship. There is the kaleidoscope one as well, and really it talks about turning the knobs depending on your personal needs or where you're at. So turning these knobs, the picture will change, and the three factors are authenticity, balance, and challenge. Now what's very interesting is that the Gen Xers have a far higher need from research for authenticity, being real, being who I am at work, at home, with my friends, and balance than baby boomers. But the challenge one is actually the same for all three. A lot of people think that challenge is lower for the Gen X. It's not. It's just there. They're not prepared to sacrifice balance and authenticity in that case. The one I do want to show you, this is the latest sort of thinking that's out there. It sounds a bit of an oxymoron in terms of mass career customization. But this is where companies and organizations are going. The ones that are retaining their staff, if you talk really big companies like Google practices mass career customization. When you get your package, it's not just about your salary, your base and your bonus, and maybe leave, etc. It's very much a situation where you can pick and choose what parts you want. If you decide, one day a week I want to work from home, no problem, tick that box and you'll be enabled to do that. And so it is about this mass career customization. Now that's about a particular point in time. This model is about scaling up and down depending on where you are at your personal life stage. So you have very different needs as a 25-year-old single with no responsibilities, perhaps rent a home or not even renting a home, maybe staying somewhere, to a 35-year-old who's married, has 2 young children and a large mortgage. Very different pressures. To a 45-year-old who the kids are now starting to get to uni age, and there's different sorts of pressures on them. To the 55-year-old who's now beginning to think of that next stage. And I talk about the 45-year-old to 55-year-old group as being, and this is my AFL coming from Melbourne, 3/4 time. It's very much a 3/4 time process, where typically the characteristics of the 3/4 time is financially they're okay. They might not realize that they're okay, but my experience is that generally Australians with super, etc., are better off than they realize. So that's the first thing. The second thing is they don't necessarily want to continue at the same level of responsibility that they have been. Many careers up to the age of 45 to 50 are what I call accidental as opposed to deliberate. Many of the people I work with will get there and say, how did I get here? This just sort of happened. And it's a case of saying, okay, that's great, I've really enjoyed my career, but now it's time to step and become a bit more deliberate. But the most important factor in that group is rather than working because they have to work, they want to work because they want to work. And that's where I do a lot of work around what is the deeper drivers, what is the passion, what gets you up in the morning, what do you really want to do? And sometimes it's quite radical. Working with a senior manager at NAB last year, a couple of years back, been at NAB his whole life, started there as a graduate, he was 51, came to me, he was thinking about, he was an executive general manager, he was thinking about what he should do, he's feeling a bit unsettled. And we went through the whole finance thing and he was comfortable with that. But his comment to me was, I got into banking because my parents told me it was the best career for me. I hate banking. I don't want to do this anymore. Financially I'm okay, I want to do something new. So long story, we went through this process with him, helping him understand who he is, his interests, etc. And it came out just in a conversation one day. We were talking a little bit about this. And he said to me, you know what I've always wanted to be was a physiotherapist. But my parents said 30 years ago, not a great career, going to banking, a lot more safe. You see the values and the culture at the time, a lot safer than becoming a physiotherapist, become a banker. So we thought to explore that. And I sent him on work experience to his physiotherapist. Went and spent 2 weeks with a physiotherapist. Saw me afterwards and said, loved it. This was really cool, but I'm not prepared to spend 6 years studying to get to be a physiotherapist. So then we looked at alternatives to get him there, and he ended up doing a 3-month massage therapy course, and he now works as a massage therapist. And what he does is, he's actually a very good sportsman, a master's level sportsman, and he's involved in the local footy club. He's their physio or massage therapist that helps them on game day and preparing for games. He also is the massage therapist for one of the large swimming clubs in Melbourne. And as a result of his connection with people in the sporting world, they've started to come to him. Massive transition, that can be quite radically different. However, for most people, it's a continuation of where they've been, but some sort of scaling back. And I talk a lot about the career diamond, where all of us, when we start off at 18, 19, 20, a little bit of an unpolished diamond, as it were. And as we go through experiences, we study, we have our first job, and so we develop. And so when I'm working with someone 45 to 50, I say, let's look at the diamond. Because there'll be facets of your diamond that have been polished. There'll be facets of the diamond that haven't been polished yet. There'll be facets of the diamond you like, and there'll be facets of the diamond you don't like. So part of my background is I've got quite a lot of experience as an IT security expert. I don't tell people that. Why? Because it doesn't energize me. If I was to tell someone that, they'd want to tell me about their latest virus and how do you fix this. Not interested in that. So my diamond I've turned, it's still there, it's part of my diamond, but what I emphasize is something very different. So I did a computer science and accounts degree, and I worked in IT most of my life. Loved it, no regrets. I can tell you I'd be looking at something different now, and that's quite okay. So let's go back to this career model. Really what we're saying is there's 4 variables, and you rate them on a 6-point scale, and it's a point in time. So if you're a 25-year-old, you will want different aspects dialed up or dialed down. If you're a 40-year-old, large mortgage, 3 kids, wife working, etc., you'll want to wind those knobs a little differently. Very tricky to do this as an organization because, again, we are so focused on this traditional organization of being a hierarchy or a ladder. But really you can see the 4 variables: the pace, the workload, the location, the role. And what I'm suggesting is that one of the key ways to retain people now is being able to transparently dial up or dial down as your life needs change. So whether you are a 55-year-old looking to transition or whether you're a 25-year-old, these things all are valid. But they may not even be based on age. It may be just based on where you're at. For whatever reason, you might find yourself in a situation at 50, single and wanting to do something else, and you can dial it differently. So what happens is research shows us that one of the reasons why people leave organizations, yes, it is poor management and all the other good things, but a lot of it is about they cannot have their needs satisfied in the organization. So they go and find an organization that can satisfy their needs. This is suggesting that if you're sensitive to where people are at and you're able to deal with them more individually, you're probably more likely going to satisfy those needs and therefore they won't be looking out to it or moving on. So let's quickly define career success. Satisfaction with career development is generally when they do employee surveys or engagement surveys, career development is often the lowest. They feel that companies don't do that. Companies feel that, well, it's not my problem because really you should be doing your own career development and there's this issue. But continuous learning and personal growth has been identified as one of the most important factors when you engage or retain staff. Now, traditional organizations were all about, they define career success as, pay, title, promotions. I remember when I first started working in an organization, I got a melamine desk with a screen about this high. As I got promoted, I got a wooden desk with a screen this high. So you could walk into the organization and immediately get a feel for where people fitted in. And the irony for me is that the wooden desk actually cost less than the melamine desk, but it was all about that prestige. Get to the next level, you get a free newspaper every day. Get to the next level and you can't see in the cubicle. Next level, you get a wooden rubbish bin. That's the traditional signs of success in organization, which are no longer as valid as they used to be. Working for an organization in South Africa, part of the package was a company car. Very expensive to run a company car scheme. So we decided to scrap it and give people the option to get paid an allowance and buy their own cars. My goodness, this caused a lot of problems. Because what could happen with that allowance, you could put in your own money and go and buy a Mercedes, even though you really were only at a Volkswagen or a lower level And so people who now had Mercedes as company cars were not happy because this guy's driving Mercedes. And we realized that it threw out that whole level of status, the whole symbols of status. So that's really the traditional way, and I'm suggesting that it's changing quite radically, very much to what we would call a corporate lattice. So today's orgs are different shapes. They are less hierarchical. You know, one of the reasons that ANZ use in at least 2 of their recent rounds that I was mentioning earlier has been to reduce middle management. What does that do? It collapses the organization. You know, if I've been coming up and I was a trainee manager, and then I became a junior manager, and then I became a manager, and then I became a senior manager, and then I became an even more senior manager. Suddenly, what's happening? Where's my career path gone? So those traditional ways of rewarding are changing. So it is very much a combination now of objective and subjective, and it's really about new responsibilities, new experiences, and very importantly, significant family and personal time and being able to scale that down. So when we talk about the career lattice, it is about helping people to move into other experiences rather than just staying on that ladder, because we cannot sustain that ladder. I did quite a bit of work for a company used to be called Anderson Consulting, and you probably know became Accenture. And what their trainee intake would always be graduates. And they worked on a fallout rate. If 100 graduates started, only 1 would get to senior manager. And they expected that attrition rate to get through. So they really put a lot of pressure on those guys to develop through. I don't think that would work anymore. So let's just talk about a couple of key steps when it comes to retaining staff in this changing and changed environment. Yes, employees must take control of their own career. They do need to see themselves as Brian Pty Ltd. One of the big difficulties that I have with clients that I work with is that so many see themselves as Brian at ANZ. Sorry, I don't know if ANZ people in the room. Brian at Company A Pty Limited. That's who they are. And if you ask them, tell me about yourself, they'll say, I work at Company A. That's their identity. Now, I have to also say this tends to be a guy problem. Hope I'm not being sexist, but tends to be males tend to have that focus far more than women. Now, the problem is if Company A turns around and says to you, thanks very much, we no longer require your services, what happens? It feels shattering. Here's this company that you've invested in, that you've been loyal to, and you'll see how angry and upset people get. Whereas if you can engage with the organization, understanding what value you bring, what is your value proposition? One of the hardest questions, by the way, in recruitment, in a recruitment interview is, why should I hire you? One of the hardest questions. People generally don't prepare for it. If you don't know why I should hire you, then who does? So you've got to be thinking about what your value proposition is, Brian Pty Limited. Once you have an understanding of that, you can then align with the organization. So we do a lot of work in the transition space, classic outplacement, etc. But we're doing increasingly work in the career management space. And I differentiate between what I call break time consulting versus game time consulting. Because organizations are realizing it's far more beneficial to engage with people while they're in the organization than when they've left. So what happens is I will work with people who the organization might feel are disengaged, just been promoted, are feeling uncomfortable themselves, any number of reasons. And one of the key things we'll do is probably 20% for every 10 people that I work with will end up leaving the organization. Because the process I take them through is, who is Brian Pty Limited? Where are you taking this organization, Brian Pty Limited? Are you moving in the direction you want to? What's the connection with the current organization? Is it aligned or not? Now, 80% of the time it is aligned, or there's adjustment needed, and you can then re-engage. But 20% of the time there isn't. And the people that leave the organization's really pleased because they've clarified that they don't want to stay within the company. And the individual leaves the organization in a really positive way because the company's helped them understand that. So in terms of taking charge of their own career, you really need to facilitate the process by providing clarity and opportunity. You do need to work more closely. Working with another larger organization, just another little story, they have something called a high potential program. Now they shortened, I don't know if you guys have heard this, but they shortened it to the HIPO program. It always sounds a bit, something's not quite right when they call it that way, but in essence it's a high potential program. They identify high potential people within their staff. It's normally sort of 5 to 10% of their staff, and they do special things for them. They pay them a bit more, give them more opportunities, all of those sort of aspects that they do for these staff. The big problem is that they don't really stop to ask the staff what they want to do. And that for me is a big gap. So they get devastated when these hypos or high potentials leave the organization. But we paid them so much, we did so much for them. No, they're coming from a paternal view. So you really need to ask your staff and engage with your staff. What do you want? Where are you at? Strategy and direction, very important to understand where we're going, what's happening. And I know you guys would know this, but your staff are not stupid. They can see when an organization's struggling. They can see when an organization's doing well or not. They want to be part of it. They want to contribute. Help employees learn about opportunities within your existing organizations and help them customize their own career. There shouldn't be a negative if someone decides to step away from a managerial job 5 days a week to maybe an individual contributor job for 3 days a week for a period of time. Now, we're quite used to managing people going on maternity leave, but why should it just be in that situation? Why can it not be in a situation where people can dial up or dial down depending on where they're at? I'm always amazed at long service leave. I know this is a federal thing that you get a certain amount of long service leave after 10 years service. Now, increasingly, we're not finding people stay for 10 years, but do you know that only 15% of people use their long service leave? Most people keep it as a backup in case they lose their job. So what's the purpose of it then? And I think the word sabbatical is a great way to describe this. The word sabbatical comes from the Jewish word Shabbat, which basically means every seventh day will rest. And on that seventh day, they rested. They renewed so that they could keep going. Now, when I work with my clients who are 40 to 45, I can tell you, often they are exhausted. It's a little bit like, a refrigerator. You use a refrigerator, after 10 years it packs up, okay, we'll get another refrigerator. You cannot do that as Brian Pty Limited. You've got to make sure that you're building a sustainable career. And really understanding what those drivers are and being able to scale up and scale down and being able to take off without penalty 3 months and go and have some space and rethink where you are at. The academic world have it, do that. I think it's every 6 years you can have a year's sabbatical. They've changed it a little bit and said that year must be spent, at another university or doing research or something like that. But it's still a re-energizing. Yep. So the other key takeaway that I'd mention to you is that the managers are actually the key source for developmental opportunities or experiences. Not HR, people and culture, not the CEO. It's the manager, the person, the supervisor. They're the one that is closest to the person, and they're the one who should be thinking about what can I add to this person's experience. So 70% of learning comes from on-the-job experience, 20% from learning from others, and only 10% comes from courses and books. So what do we do when someone comes to me and says, I'm feeling stagnated, I want to do something else? We send them on a course. Does it have value? Sometimes. Normally very little value because they come back and they're not going to use what they've learned. So really, investment time should be invested in the managers to help develop them to become better coaches of their staff. And it should actually be incentivized to have their staff move around as opposed to just keep them within the team. Because that's something else that happens, these little silos. I've got a good guy, I'm not going to let anyone know about him. These sort of things that happen. New methods, recruiting, assessing, retaining staff across multiple generations. You reach people in very different ways depending on those generations. Engage the staff you do have. I'm amazed at how many people are looking at outside of the organization, recruitment, etc., and not talking within. I mean, there's a common, they say it's a myth, but I'm not sure about this, that if you want to increase your salary, you leave an organization, go to another one, and then come back in a few years' time, and you'll earn more than if you'd stayed in the organization. That is terrible. I mean, what's the message you're giving to your staff? that leaving the organization is better for me than staying. And then obviously the engagement of baby boomers is pretty key in terms of retaining your staff and filling that talent gap. Guys, thank you for your time. Hopefully it's given you a slightly different perspective of where the staff situation is at the moment. Happy to take, how are we doing time-wise? Are we able to take a few questions? If there are any questions, very happy to take any questions if you'd like. Come on, we've got to have is that a question? Oh, sorry, yeah, cool. So, not sure if you heard the question. Henry Ford started this whole production line thinking when it comes to work, and that 9 to 5 is the most productive time to work, and therefore that's why we work 9 to 5. I do see a change. It is about flexibility. I mean, you know, it's crazy that we should all be on the roads at the same time in the morning and coming home at the same time at night. It just seems crazy to me. Why should we do that? You know, why not make a person able to start when it's convenient for them, as opposed to want you there at 9 and leave you there at 5? And I just think organizations have not thought about what their triggers are, what are their levers. And they tend to think, well, the 9 to 5, it's traditional, we'll just leave it that way. Talk to your staff. It might be a critical engagement lever if I give you the flexibility to manage your day and give me 8 hours work, but you decide when that 8 hour is. I mentioned this guy, this Oracle consultant that I met with this morning. His manager sits in Singapore. His manager has no awareness of what he does every day. He lets himself manage. And he will sometimes, as today, you know, he took off today, came and met with me. He and his wife were going to see an architect, but then he's on a bit later. And that's what a knowledge worker can do. You know, the other aspect is also about having a physical place to come together. Why do we do that? Yes, sometimes it's important, but sometimes in terms of your life stage, it's very appropriate for you to not work from home, to work in other places. But, you know, it's really interesting for me. I've done quite a bit of work on motivational techniques and motivating teams. And when you study what motivates people, it's not the same thing for everyone. So everyone thinks, whoa, you know, motivational, my team's a bit low, I'm going to go run a team building exercise, we're going to put on dirty clothes and we're going to run through the mud and we're going to bond. I can tell you that probably 20% of that team enjoy it. You probably have demotivated the rest because that's not what turns them on. So this is why the Me Inc. is quite important. What's their individual driver as opposed to that group think? And that's, I guess, part of the key message of what I'm saying to you guys. As opposed to looking mass, but it's customization as well. So yeah, I can talk a lot more on that, but I do see a very big change.
Fantastic. Brian, thank you very much. I don't know if you like red wine or not, but I think we could sit down for hours over a couple of bottles of red wine and have some wonderful chats with you about careers and where people can go with their life. Please put your hands together for Brian Gardner. Thanks very much.